Hello and welcome to India's World. As she seeks a fourth term in office, German Chancellor Angela Merkel seems to be moving rightwards. Under pressure from an increasingly vocal racist and anti-immigrant sentiment, she has decided to take a tough line on war refugees and their integration into German society, including a ban on the niqab or the full veil. Merkel has said that it was legitimate for Germany to expect immigrants to integrate and that this included a rejection of the full veil. She has also indicated that the liberal immigration policies of the past will not continue into the future. If Germany chooses to follow Merkel's suggestions, it will join a number of other European countries that have passed similar measures. In the face of an immigrant crisis, sluggish economic growth, and growing disillusionment with the European Union, political parties in a number of European countries have begun to adopt a right-wing political discourse as the key to achieving electoral success. Up to a decade ago, this was true only of the far-right parties. However, now, even centrist parties are moving rightwards to keep their flock intact. Germany is only the latest example of this. To discuss the rise of the right-wing, anti-liberal and inward-looking politics in Europe, we have with us three distinguished diplomats who have served in Europe. We have with us Ambassador T.C.A. Ranagachari. He was India's ambassador to Germany and France. He is a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. We have with us Ambassador Dinkar Khullar. He was India's ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg and the European Union. And we have with us Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee. He was India's ambassador to Nepal and Egypt and High Commissioner to South Africa and the United Kingdom. I welcome you gentlemen to this discussion. Ranga, let me begin with you. Now, Merkel has been a vocal supporter of war refugees and Muslims despite growing racism in Europe. Her party, the Christian Democratic Union, is actually leading currently in opinion polls. So it's not as if it's trailing and therefore she has to do something new. Do you think Merkel recognizes that her own support in the party, her own supporters may be wary of her liberal policies? So is her ostensible rightward shift a political choice or is it a compulsion?
Well, I think this is something which is just realism. And irrespective of whether it is a shift to the right or extreme right or whatever, the fact is that there is a great deal of concern today, and I think you were quite right in your introductory remarks in pointing not simply to the issue of immigration, but also to other issues like the economic downturn and the disillusionment with Brussels and so on. These are all issues which also have a very important role to play in the way in which European politics is shaping up. At the recent CDU convention, where she was accepted or she was elected as the nominee for the fourth term, she did talk about this, but at the same time she also said that it's not possible for one person, even the Chancellor of Germany, to be able to bring about a change. This is very realistic because this is what is happening within Germany. Last year, if you recall, she had been very liberal, and liberal I use not in a political sense, but in terms of simply the English language term of saying that she would accept, or the Germany would accept every single refugee who turned up at the doors of Germany. And in fact, in that sense, in a sense, she broke the pact with the European Union. Now, even her very close allies, within her own interior minister, for example, then a very close allied party like the CSU in Bavaria, they have been very critical. And then, of course, this year in the elections, 5 elections that have been held, CDU has lost every one of them. And you have in Eastern Germany the rise of the Alternative for Democracy, AfD party. And they have managed to increase their vote share, and they might very well have a presence in the booth. So this is realistic. Ultimately, the political parties reflect the public sentiment.
Okay. Dinkar, do you think that by arguing for a ban on the full veil or committing to limit refugee arrival, is she outlining a strategy to counter the emergence of racist parties that have consumed her key allies abroad and threatened to do so within Germany, as Ranga is suggesting?
I think it's, if only to repeat what Ambassador Ranagachari said, it's just being realistic in preparation for an electoral process. There is an issue, there is a general opinion within the country and within Europe at large as we know, that the immigrants are posing problems not just of a social nature but of a serious economic nature, which is the problem of employment. And at a time of economic downturn, she obviously needs to keep the interests of the voter in mind when making her decision. as far as whether it will have a long-term impact, I am not entirely convinced, because Merkel herself, given by what she did last year, as compared to most of the other leaders in Europe, I think she's likely to use this as a political weapon, but not use it as a squeeze. It won't be a squeeze as some other countries are doing, and I'm unlikely to see Germany erecting barriers like some other countries have done, building fences to prevent people from coming in.
Okay, quickly, Ranga, you wanted to
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, the term racist may not be entirely appropriate, because this is not something which is new. In Germany, even earlier, there was, you know, when I was there, constantly the Germans would say that people who come into Germany should be able to speak the German language, should be able to adapt and integrate with the German culture and so on. Now, unlike in the past, when you had mostly Christians, mostly, you know, Europeans coming into Germany, today you are looking at people coming from the Middle East, Afghanistan.
Well, Turks have been there for ages.
Well, that's true. But the Turks have always had a problem because of the problem of integration and so on. Therefore, racist may not necessarily be the appropriate word.
Now, Shiv, do you think Angela Merkel is doing the right thing? You know, I mean, why not be a statesman? Why become leader of the lowest common denominator, because that's what is going to win you elections? Because leadership is also about setting an agenda, being vanguardist, you know, and not going down to the basest level in society.
To be very blunt, I think if you are statesman-like in the current situation in the world as I see it, if you are statesman-like, if you set a very liberal agenda and do not go down to the lowest common denominator of populism, you lose elections. And therefore, Brexit and Donald Trump being examples, I think she is a consummate politician. She's dominated Europe for the last decade and a half. Intrinsically liberal, as we all know, but I'll use the same word that my colleagues used. She's a realist. At this present moment, and you pointed out to those three important pillars of what the present situation is, the longest economic downturn in Europe after 2008, the immigration crisis with its subtext of terrorist Islam, and disenchantment with the European Union with the subtext of my country first. Yeah. So you put all this together, and she sees an election looming where these things figure very, very well. Anti-elitism, the lowest common denominator factor, the people who have not had their incomes increased, who are out of work, and so on. And she has to make these moves.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the rightward shift in Europe's politics. Ranga, is the refugee problem being overblown by the right-wing parties of Europe? According to a recent Oxfam report, for example, most Western countries, including Germany, have actually taken a very small percentage of asylum seekers from the Middle East, with the majority actually seeking asylum in developing countries like Turkey and Lebanon.
But Oxfam, of course, needs to say that, because Oxfam's job is to settle refugees and so on.
But would they lie?
Let me be the devil's. No, I'm not disputing the figures. Yeah. And it's true. I mean, as far as the Syrian refugees are concerned, virtually 50% of Syria are displaced, and they are most of them are in the neighboring Arab countries. But let me be devil's advocate. Why is it incumbent upon the Europeans to take refugees from the Middle East? Number one. Number two.
Because here you are part of NATO and they bombed the hell out of those people.
That's only Turkey we are talking about. No, let me just finish this. Second thing is that insofar as many of these elements, particularly ISIS, other terrorist fundamentalist organizations in the Middle East are concerned, what are they saying? They're basically saying we are fighting against the Christian world. And then you want to move to the same Christian world. I mean, this,
those who are running away from ISIS and those who want to fight the Christian world, they're running away from them. The refugees are running away from them.
As I said,
they don't share their perspective.
As I said, I'm putting to you the devil's advocate
and also tell me why this business of full veil in Germany, when not even 0.1% of Germany wears the full veil. The Turks have never worn the veil.
Let's get back to the earlier point. You're absolutely right that because of the fact that many of these European countries have been part of the NATO, part of this entire destabilized existing regimes and so on, in the name of certain values which were called liberal values, etc. That has perhaps been the reason why you have this exodus out of these countries. So in that sense, you could talk in terms of a moral obligation. That since they were the cause of the conflagration, they must also...
I don't want to go there, because if we talk of moral obligation, I think America should take most of these refugees because they started these wars, but I don't want to go there.
Fair enough.
So Dinkar, let me ask you this. Would you say that Europe's this new far right is different from the far right that we saw at the beginning of this century? These people today are, whether it's in France, Netherlands, Denmark, they're far better organized, they are much more disciplined, and they're not homophobes. They're not anti-Semitic.
No, they're quite different from what we associate with the term of neo-fascists of the past. In fact, oddly enough, when we use the term far right, I sometimes get confused because on the one hand, if you take the Scandinavian countries, their economic policies are still very welfare state oriented, or more to the left. It is on the social and political side that the conservatism and the right has increased, and that is for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier, which is that the immigrants pose not only a social problem to them, they pose also an economic problem to them. Both of these lead to this idea that we must keep them out. But that doesn't mean we must change our economic policies which still protect the poor.
But a welfare state for whites like us, not for citizens who are not of the same color or of same religion.
I don't think they go as far as that. Those who are there, after all, the immigrants have not existed in these countries. We have a large number of immigrants in the Scandinavian countries from Asia. They will not be treated differently. I think the intention is that we limit the number who are going to come in to be the beneficiaries of our taxation system and the welfare state.
Okay. Shiv, would you therefore say, from what Dinkar is saying, that the new right in Europe has outflanked the centrist parties by taking over their agenda, but it's also outflanked the left by taking over the agenda of a welfare state, a state that protects its citizens, but wants to limit it to the current population. So the right is finished, and so is the left.
I think I would agree with that. Let me explain. From what Dinkar said, you see, we must contextualize. If you're talking of the previous right, the turn of the century or even before and now, and the things in between, we have to contextualize. The right-wing politics began with in the modern era, began with the French Revolution, where the aristocrats sat on the right and the socialists, revolutionaries sat on the left. And the only difference was the aristocrats were for the status quo, and these people, the left, was for change. The fascist right, the extremist, the pre-post World War II and so on, was basically the right-wing, extreme right-wing of a charismatic leader in whose hands all power, he represented the state and so on.
National socialism.
National socialism. Today's right, you're right, I think, is perfectly willing to live with democracy on its own terms, and they're using the system, I think, very skillfully. And it's not as though they have, I think, the political acumen alone, and the center, which is most of Europe, has lost it. Well, I mean, as Geun-Hye said, the center does not hold, things fall apart. I think the centrist political parties in Europe have basically felt that this right-wing movement is a phenomenon that will go away. It's fringe stuff and so on. We don't really have to worry about it. So it's led to a situation where I think Stephen Hawking described it brilliantly. He said that these elitist parties really were elitist, I mean the centrist parties, and a large swath of the population, and Donald Trump's election proves that, and it's reflected in Europe, felt abandoned. So in today's lurch to the right, I see sense in what you just said.
Ranga, so was Brexit just the start of what's happening in Europe? And do you think Europe's new far right is poised to transform the political landscape of Europe through elections? And if it's not possible through elections, then by shifting the centrist discourse so much to the right that their values and their program becomes the new normal?
Well, in a way, Brexit was a consequence of the discontent at the level, popular level, with quote-unquote Brussels. Now, Habermas wrote about 3 months ago on this, and they said the answer to this is more integration, not less integration. Now, if you accept that argument, then Brexit will be an exception. There is a great deal of discontent with, as I said, the way in which things are conducted in the European Union from Brussels and so on. But if the European Union is to stay together, then they have to address the basic problems that concerns the common citizen.
Absolutely, but I'm not on that. I'm merely saying, clearly Habermas is not driving the right-wing shift in European politics. He's opposed to it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the people who are driving it, and they're driving it in a twofold way. One, contesting elections, occupying positions of power where they can influence policy, and two, by shifting the public discourse to issues that they have put on the agenda, which the liberals did not, which the centrists did not.
But naturally, I mean, if you are going to change, bring about a political change, you have to change the national discourse. Taking our country back is a very good way of appealing to anybody who feels alienated, that you are no longer in control of your future. The only way in which you can be in control of your future is by doing A, B, C, D. And then you go on to describe A, B, C, D the way in which you want to. Now, this is what is happening in many of the countries. And I think in the course, and because of the fact that this comes out of a real feeling amongst the common people, therefore, this discourse will have to be addressed.
Okay.
Having addressed it, which way you go is something that is still open.
All right. Okay. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the rightward shift in Europe's politics. Shiv, why is it that the working class voters have abandoned the left parties in Europe and become the backbone of the populist right? I mean, this has happened in the UK in Brexit, and it's happening in France, and it's happening in Denmark, and it's happening in the Netherlands.
I think the simple answer is the correct one. The average working class, again, I must contextualize. In today's Europe, and wherever this phenomenon is happening, where you have a situation where there's economic stagnation, where jobs are not being created and even being lost, the left is not seen to be providing any agenda for helping these people who feel abandoned, as Hawking said. The right has very cleverly, Brexit was an example, the entire message was populist. Populism, in my mind, always wins over cold logic and statistics and so on when you're dealing with the masses. The left lost it. The left talked about Marxist jargon and ideology and the universal. The right gave that message, which was exactly the opposite of universalism of the left, which was my country first, you and me first, our jobs first, immigrants out. Simple, straight, xenophobic, emotional messages which struck a chord.
Yeah. But Dinkar, let's talk about Netherlands. This Heat Wilders Party for Freedom, or PVV, they've surpassed the Dutch Labour Party to take up close second place in polls ahead of the March 2017 election. And the party is called for closing of all Islamic schools and recording the ethnicity of all Dutch citizens. So why has the integration of Muslim immigrants become the most divisive issue in Dutch politics? Because it used to be inclusive politics. There were all kinds of people there.
I don't think that's true only of Netherlands. It's a problem which is Europe-wide.
Yeah.
The present leadership of this party, Wilders, he was far more extreme a couple of years ago than he is now in his policies. Its answer is the same. Essentially, the economics talks on these issues and the social agenda, the conservative social agenda, which has grown in Europe. However, I don't see it leading to abandonment of the European concept, the European idea, because as opposed to Brexit, the rest of Europe have benefited greatly from the two major pan-European ideas. One was Schengen and one was the Euro. And I am not quite convinced that unlike the British, unlike the British, they are unlikely to therefore abandon the idea of Europe. But the problem with in Netherlands is indeed more serious. But Austria, I mean, they have had a problem. The Freedom Party, which almost won the presidential election just a few days ago, they have been saying that minarets should be removed, should not be allowed.
Switzerland.
Yep. Ranga, now let's take another European country, Denmark. In January this year, when the refugee crisis was at its peak, Denmark brought in what was called the jewellery law, which stipulated that any refugee carrying more than 10,000 kroners worth of jewellery would find that his jewellery is confiscated or her jewellery is confiscated, and that would be used for accommodating asylum seekers. Now, there was a lot of criticism of this in the media, because, especially for the Jewish community, because they said we had to pay our life savings to escape fascism, and that how can our country do the same? So, but wasn't it surprising that it wasn't only the rightists and the government who supported it, but also the social democrats voted for the jewellery law?
But just before we get to that, Schengen was mentioned. And I should point to a very interesting contradiction in the EU's policy. They are insisting with Britain that if you want to be part of an FTA with Europe, you want to be part of the single market, etc., you must accept free movement of people. With India, they are arguing exactly the opposite. That even if you have an FTA with us, we are not going to allow you to have. I think at some point we need to point this out to the Europeans, maybe also to the British, to egg them on to see whether the Europeans would extend that principle. In regard to Denmark, I think essentially the feeling is that a lot of people who are political refugees, who are economic refugees, are using political reasons to get into Europe. And probably this is one of the manifestations of that thought process, that if they have enough money to look after themselves, why should they be fleeing and seeking refugee status or asylum
political reasons,
in Europe?
Period. You yourself said that.
True. But you see, political immigration is one thing, economic immigration are those who are well off. Maybe the thought process is, why do they have to come to Denmark? They can go elsewhere. Maybe they can buy their freedom in some other countries. There are many countries which tell you that, you know, if you invest X amount of money, automatically you get citizenship.
So you think the parallel with the Jews fleeing fascism is not correct? Because they were rich people, they were business people. They could have paid their way and, you know, got citizenship, I don't know, maybe in Sri Lanka, Maldives, God knows where. But the fact is, you go to countries where you feel most comfortable living, and you go there for political reasons.
As you said earlier, these right-wing parties are not anti-Semitic. In fact, recently, this happened with the Alternative for Democracy in Baden-Württemberg.
Anti-Muslim.
Yeah, that has shifted. Now, in Baden-Württemberg, one of the AfD members made an anti-Semitic remark. He was removed from the party. Yeah. So they are not anti-Semitic.
Similarly,
in
the Front National in France, you cannot make anti-Semitic remarks.
Yeah, quite right.
So these are, of course, this is a new phenomena. All I'm saying is, but the insular mindset that those who are different from us, seeking shelter in our society, seeking entitlement on a limited resources, must be kept out.
Indeed. Yeah. They want to have people who think similarly, who can integrate with them.
Shiv, so where will all this end? In Greece, you have the new fascist party called Golden Dawn, which has won 18 seats in parliament. In Hungary, you have Jobbik, again, you know, anti-immigration, populist, protectionist party. In Sweden, you have the rise of Sweden Democrats Party, again, a far-right party. In Austria, was just pointed out, the Green Party barely made it to the presidency. So do you see this relentless march of right-wing politics in Europe continuing?
I see it continuing, certainly. I see it continuing even outside Europe. We've seen it in India. So the only thing I absolutely don't know is how long it will last. In Europe, it's taken about 15 years, 16 years. In 2000, Jörg Haider in Austria became a coalition partner in the ruling government. At that time, 16 years ago, Austria was, well, forgive the alliteration, Austria was ostracized by the rest of Europe. The condemnation was heaped upon them. It was a very liberal Europe. They couldn't understand how this happened. Today it's happening all over the place, and eyebrows, you know, you're not getting that kind of condemnation everywhere, because there are similar movements everywhere, with the center, in fact, exactly as you said in your introduction, trying to lurch towards some of the elements of the right to conserve their voters' majority.
Okay, last word to you, Dinkar, since you've spent a good part of your life in Europe. How long will this process continue in Europe, and would we ever see the re-emergence of the liberal Europe that we have sort of grown up with and learned to live with from this right-wing fog that seems to engulf Europe?
Let me begin by saying that the right wing, in political terms and in electoral terms, tend to adopt agendas which win them votes. In government, they tend to get moderated. As you recall, even the Greek government, which was of course seeking left-wing votes, they also moderated their stance once they came into government. So I don't see the end of liberalism. There is a very strong strand of liberalism in the European psyche. Yeah. Therefore, I think it will emerge in one form or the other. It will take time, and it will certainly not, I don't see it dying out at all.
Okay, we've really run out of time, so quickly.
There's one very quick point I wanted to make, that in France we are talking about, the shift to the right, etc. The fact is, the socialist government has made a mess. François Hollande's popularity was down to 4%. And he has agreed that he would not run again for presidency. So, it's not only...
But he hasn't said he'll support the Front National.
No, that doesn't matter. The fact is that, people will decide which way they want to go.
Right. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank all my guests, Ambassadors Shiv, Shankar, Mukherjee, Dinkar, Khullar and T.C. Ranagachari. Thank you for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Until then, goodbye and thanks for joining us on India's World.